was 35 years old, the first time I understood that grief could be a leash. Not a wound, not a weight. A leash. Something someone else had tied around your neck, while you were too devastated to notice. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what 12 years looks like from the inside. I want you to understand that it doesn't feel like obsession while you're living it. It feels like loyalty. It feels like love. It feels like the only sane response to an insane situation. My brother Daniel was dead, and nobody had been punished for it. That seemed wrong to me in a way that went beyond logic or reason or practicality. It wasn't about the legal system. It wasn't about closure, a word I came to despise. It was simpler than that and more irrational. Someone had hit my brother with a car and driven away, and I could not accept that they were still out there somewhere, living a normal life. I remember the phone call from my mother. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that when my phone rang, I thought it was a wrong number, because who calls at 6:15 in the morning unless something has gone wrong? Everything had gone wrong. She didn't cry on the phone. My mother wasn't a crier, not in front of people, not even her own children. She just said his name, Daniel, and then a pause that lasted longer than it had any right to last. And then there was an accident. I drove to the hospital, still in the clothes I'd slept in. By the time I got there, he was already gone. Daniel Walker was 27 years old when he died. He was 4 years older than me, which meant that for my entire childhood, he existed as something between a brother and a landmark, a fixed point I oriented myself around. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the Methodist Church on Keller Street, running alongside me with one hand on the seat until he wasn't. Until I looked back and realized I'd been doing it alone for half a block, and he was standing there with his hands in his pockets, grinning. He was the one who drove 3 hours to sit with me in the hospital waiting room when I had my appendix out at 19, because our parents couldn't make it. He brought a bag of chips and a crossword book, and we sat in those plastic chairs until 2 in the morning, doing crosswords and not talking about how scared I was. He called our parents every Sunday, not because he felt obligated, or maybe he did, but it never sounded that way. It sounded like he actually wanted to talk. He remembered things. He'd call our mother and ask how her book club was going, ask our father how the truck was running, ask about neighbors by name. He was attentive in a way that felt rare, especially in our family, which ran toward the self-contained. I'm telling you who he was, because I need you to understand what it felt like to lose him. Not just as a statistic, not just as a victim, but as a specific, irreplaceable person who took up space in the world, in a way I didn't fully appreciate until that space was empty. The police told us it was a hit and run. Late at night, a residential road about 2 miles from the house he grew up in. He'd been walking alone, no phone in hand, no headphones. The impact knocked him onto the shoulder of the road. A neighbor found him 20 minutes later and called 911, but by then too much time had passed. No one saw the vehicle. No traffic cameras on that stretch of road. No witnesses who came forward. The detective assigned to the case, a tired-looking man named Briggs who wore the same brown jacket to every meeting, told us these things with the practiced gentleness of someone who had delivered this kind of news before and expected to deliver it again. He said they were following up on leads. He said the investigation was ongoing. He said sometimes these cases took time. Briggs retired 2 years later. The case was transferred. The new detective sent us a letter, then nothing. I watched my parents absorb this in ways I couldn't understand. My mother became quieter, if that was possible, more careful with her words, more deliberate in her movements, as if she were carrying something fragile inside her chest that might break if she moved too fast. My father stopped taking the truck out on weekends. He used to drive up the coast on Saturday mornings, come back smelling like salt air, sometimes with fish wrapped in newspaper for dinner. He stopped doing that. I thought they were grieving. I didn't know, yet that grief looks almost identical to guilt from the outside. The funeral was small. Daniel didn't have a large social circle. He had a few close friends, and they all showed up, red-eyed and slightly stunned in the way that young people become stunned when one of their own dies unexpectedly. There was a woman named Claire who dated Daniel for 3 years and broken up with him 8 months before the accident. She stood apart from everyone else and cried without making a sound, and I remember thinking that she had more right to be there than almost anyone. My father gave the eulogy. He talked about Daniel with a specificity that I found almost painful, stories I hadn't heard. Details about Daniel's childhood I'd forgotten or never known. He talked about the first time Daniel rode a horse at a ranch outside Sacramento when he was 8, and how he'd refused to admit he was terrified. He talked about the way Daniel used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror with encouraging messages for whoever found them. He talked about Daniel's laugh, which was too loud and slightly embarrassing in quiet restaurants, and how he would apologize and then do it again 30 seconds later because he couldn't help it. He talked about his son with love that seemed bottomless. At the time, it didn't occur to me to wonder why he couldn't look at the casket. I was 23 years old. I was watching my brother get put in the ground. I wasn't looking at my father. I made the promise at the grave, not out loud. I'm not someone who does things out loud when I feel them most intensely. That's a Walker family trait, the particular silence we use as a container for the feelings too large to speak. I stood at the edge of Daniel's grave with dirt on my shoes from the soft mourning ground, and I made a promise to him the way you make promises to people you've loved your entire life, which is without ceremony and without witnesses, just a quiet understanding between two people that one of them happened to be dead. I'm going to find out who did this. I meant it. I had no idea what it would cost me. The first year was the least organized. I was still working at the architecture firm in Portland, still keeping something that resembled a normal life, but I spent every evening and every weekend on the case. I made a binder. I printed out everything I could find: the police report, the accident reconstruction diagram, the handful of news articles that had run in the local paper, the brief follow-up pieces when no arrest was made. I pinned a map to the wall of my apartment. I marked where Daniel had been found. I drew the routes he might have walked from the 2 or 3 places he typically spent his evenings. I contacted witnesses myself, knocked on doors in the neighborhood, asked the same questions Detective Briggs had asked 2 years earlier with the slightly delusional belief that people might remember something different if someone who loved Daniel asked, instead of a tired detective in a brown jacket. Mostly people were kind. They said they were sorry for my loss. A few of them said they'd told the police everything they knew, which wasn't much. One man, an older veteran who lived at the end of the road where Daniel was found, told me he thought he'd heard a vehicle that night, not the impact, but a vehicle, driving fast. He'd looked at his clock. It was just past 11. I wrote it down. It matched nothing in the police report. I drove to the police station the next day and asked to speak with whoever currently held the file. The file was in storage. The detective was in a different department. The new detective was handling 17 other cases. I left my number. Nobody called. My parents, to their credit, or so I believed then, never asked me to stop. My mother made no comments about the binders stacked in my childhood bedroom during the holidays, took no apparent notice of the phone calls I made from the back porch, the voice low so as not to disturb her, following up on some lead or another that usually went nowhere. My father sometimes asked how the search was going, and his face when I described new leads or dead ends carried something I interpreted as shared grief, the same heaviness, the same need for answers. One Christmas, about 4 years in, he put his hand on my shoulder after dinner and said, "You're a good brother, Ethan. Daniel would know that." I held on to those words for years. I thought they meant something completely different than what they actually meant. The call from Aunt Margaret came in November, 12 years after Daniel's funeral. She was my father's older sister. She'd never been particularly close to our immediate family. She lived in Bend, Oregon, almost 4 hours away, and visits were occasional and slightly formal, the kind of family relationship built more on obligation than warmth. She called my cell phone directly, which she almost never did. Her voice when I picked up was different, thinner, like something in it had been compressed. She said she was in the hospital. She said she needed to tell me something before she ran out of time to tell it. She said, "Your father cried harder than anyone at that funeral, Ethan. I need you to understand something about why." I thought she meant grief. She meant something else entirely. She said, "Come to Bend. Come soon. There are things your family should have told you a long time ago." I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and the refrigerator humming, and outside the window, the first snow of the season beginning to fall. And I felt something shift in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Not suspicion, not quite, just the sudden, vertiginous awareness that a door had opened somewhere in the dark, and that whatever was on the other side of it had been waiting for 12 years. Let me tell you what 12 years of searching actually looks like. It doesn't look like the movies. There's no dramatic board covered in red string, no late-night breakthroughs set to swelling music, no moment where the pieces suddenly snap into place and everything becomes clear. What it looks like is a binder that becomes two binders that becomes a filing cabinet. It looks like a credit card statement with line items for gas, for overnight motels in towns you'd never otherwise visit, for court filing fees and records requests, and the occasional private investigator who takes your money and sends you a PDF that contains nothing you didn't already know. It looks like the face of a woman you were dating for 8 months when she says, very carefully, that she loves you, but she can't compete with a ghost. She wasn't wrong. I just couldn't stop. The false leads were the worst part. Not the dead ends were almost manageable, because at least they were conclusive. The false leads were something else. A false lead gave you momentum. A false lead made you feel, briefly, like you were closing in on something real. 3 years into the search, a man in Medford contacted me through the website I'd built. A simple thing, just Daniel's photo, a brief summary of what happened, a contact form. The man said he'd seen a dark-colored pickup truck driving erratically on Highway 101 the night of the accident, about 40 minutes south of where Daniel was found. He said the truck had a cracked taillight. He said he'd thought about it for years. I drove to Medford. I sat across from him in a diner for 2 hours. He was sincere. He wasn't lying. He had genuinely seen something that bothered him, but the location was wrong. The timing was wrong. And when I went back to the accident report and cross-referenced the route, the geography simply didn't work. I drove home in the dark and sat in my car in the parking garage of my building for a long time, not quite ready to go upstairs and face the filing cabinet. That was year 3. I still had 9 more to go. I quit the architecture firm at year 4, not because of the search exactly, or not only because of it. There were other reasons, legitimate professional reasons, a difficult project and a difficult manager, and the general sense that I was sleepwalking through work that had stopped meaning anything to me. But it freed up time. I started consulting independently, which paid worse but gave me flexibility. Flexibility I used, almost immediately, to pursue a lead in Grants Pass that turned into nothing, and then a lead in Coos Bay that turned into slightly less than nothing. I became, in the parlance of the internet forums I occasionally frequented, a civilian investigator. There was a community of them, people who'd been touched by unsolved crimes, who couldn't let go, who believed that persistence could compensate for the limitations of official channels. Some of them were sharp, disciplined, genuinely useful to cold case detectives who were willing to work with them. Others had crossed some invisible line into something unhealthier, where the investigation itself had become a substitute for a life rather than a component of one. I told myself I was the first kind. I'm not certain that was always true. My parents came to Portland to visit me in the spring of year 6. My mother looked at the filing cabinet and said nothing. My father stood in the doorway of the room I used as an office and looked at the wall where I'd pinned a new timeline, refined, cross-referenced, annotated in 3 colors of ink, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're thorough." It wasn't quite a compliment. It wasn't quite anything. It sat in the air between us in a way I didn't know how to interpret, so I interpreted it as admiration, because that was the interpretation that allowed me to continue. That evening, we had dinner at the restaurant on the corner, and my father ordered a beer and then didn't drink it. And when I looked at him across the table, he seemed somewhere else entirely. I asked if he was all right. He said he was tired. Long drive. I believed him. The years that had the most momentum, paradoxically, were also the years that cost me the most. Year 7, I spent 4 months focused on a contractor named Gary Tillman, who'd worked in the area around the time of Daniel's death and had a prior DUI. I built an entire dossier. I paid a private investigator $1,400 to run a background check and verify his whereabouts. I contacted 2 people who'd worked with him. Gary Tillman had been at a family reunion in Sacramento the night Daniel died. I verified it 3 separate ways. I sat in my car outside the county record's office, and felt something go out of me that took a long time to come back. My therapist, I'd started seeing a therapist in year 5, which I mention not for sympathy, but because it's accurate, told me I might want to consider what it meant that I had organized my life entirely around a search with no guaranteed resolution. She wasn't suggesting I give up. She was suggesting I examine why the alternative felt impossible. I thought about it. I went home and opened the filing cabinet. I drove to Bend the day after Aunt Margaret called. She was in a room at St. Charles Medical Center, small against the hospital bed, in a way that people become small when the illness has been winning for a while. She was 69 years old, but she looked older, her hands thin, her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for a long time and recently decided to stop. She'd asked the nurse to give us privacy. When the door closed, she looked at me for a moment in a way that felt like she was collecting herself. Then she said, "I've been carrying this for 12 years, Ethan. I'm not going to carry it any longer." I sat in the chair beside her bed. I didn't say anything. Something in her voice told me this wasn't a moment for questions. "The night Daniel died," she said, "your father called me at 11:45, not the next morning, not after he'd spoken to the police. At 11:45 that night while Daniel was still," she stopped, started again. "He called me and he was not himself. You understand what I mean. He was not himself." I understood. "He told me there had been an accident." She looked at the window. Outside, the sky was the flat gray of Oregon in November. "He told me Daniel was hurt and he didn't know what to do. And I told him to call 911 and he said he had. He said someone had already called, a neighbor. And then he said something I have thought about every single day since." She turned back to me. "He said, 'Margaret, I need you to not ask me anything tonight. I need you to just be my sister tonight.' And I was. God help me, I was." She told me the rest of it slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed a thing many times without being entirely sure they'd ever say it. There had been an argument that evening. She didn't know all the details. No one had told her everything, only pieces, which she'd assembled over the following months from things she'd overheard, things she'd been told in confidence, things she'd inferred from the silences. Daniel and their father had argued at the house. About money, she thought, or about something money was standing in for some older tension that had been building. Daniel had left, on foot, because his car was blocked in the driveway. Their father had followed him, in the truck. "He said he just wanted to talk," Margaret told me. Her voice was very flat now, the emotion wrung out of it by what had clearly been years of internal repetition. "He said Daniel wouldn't stop walking, and he was trying to keep pace with him and talk through the window. And then he says Daniel stepped off the curb, or he misjudged the distance, or..." She closed her eyes. "There are different versions depending on who told me. The truck made contact, not at speed, not deliberately, but it made contact. The room was very quiet. I was aware of my own breathing, in a way I hadn't been a moment before. And Daniel fell," she said, "and your father panicked, and instead of..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. By the time help arrived, it had been 20 minutes, maybe more. I drove away from the hospital and pulled into the parking lot of a gas station 4 blocks away and sat there for a long time. The pieces were already moving in my head, because 12 years of investigation had given me a mind that moved automatically toward pattern recognition, toward cross-referencing, toward the compulsive assembly of timelines. I was doing it before I'd even consciously decided to. The timeline. The accident was reported at 11:52 p.m., according to the police report. The neighbor who called 911 said he'd found Daniel approximately 20 minutes after hearing what he thought was a sound, something he described to police as like something heavy dropping. That put the moment of impact around 11:30, 11:35 at the latest. But the old veteran on the road, the one who told me he heard a vehicle driving fast, checked his clock. He'd said 11:05, 11:10 at the outside. I'd never been able to reconcile those two timestamps. I sat in the gas station, parking lot, and understood, finally, what that gap represented. It wasn't the time between impact and 911. It was the time between impact and when my father made his decision. 20 to 25 minutes, maybe more. I thought about Daniel, on the shoulder of that road in the dark. I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands. I went home to my apartment. I opened the filing cabinet. I pulled out the binder I'd labeled vehicle evidence, a thin one, because there had never been much. I went to the section on local auto body shops I'd canvassed in year 2, looking for any record of a vehicle brought in with unexplained front-end damage in the weeks following Daniel's death. There was a page I'd marked with a yellow flag and then never followed up on, because at the time it had seemed like a weak lead. A small body shop in town, family-owned, the kind of place that had been there since the 80s. The owner had told me when I'd visited in year 2 that he didn't keep records that far back. He'd been pleasant, apologetic. He'd offered me coffee. I turned to that page now. I looked at the name of the shop. Then I looked at a business card I'd kept in the back of the binder, from a receipt I'd once found in my father's truck when I was helping him clean it out sometime in year 1, just a few months after Daniel's funeral. A business card stapled to a receipt for exterior panel work and paint. I'd kept it without knowing why. The business card was from the same shop. The receipt was dated 11 days after Daniel's death. I sat with that for a long time. I found the witness statement the following morning. It had been in the police file all along. I'd obtained a copy of the complete file in year 3, after filing a public records request that took 7 months to be fulfilled. It was a statement from a woman who lived 3 houses down from my parents. She'd given it to police 4 days after the accident. She said she thought she'd seen a truck leaving the Walker house. Her word, the Walker house. She knew my family by name. Sometime around 11 p.m. the night Daniel died. Police had noted it in the file. Police had apparently decided it was not significant. The truck was described as dark-colored. My father's truck was navy blue. I had looked at that statement before, years earlier. I had dismissed it because it was my father's street, his truck, and of course someone might have seen him coming or going on an ordinary evening. I looked at it now with different eyes. I closed the binder. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, which was unusual. My mother typically let calls go to voicemail and returned them on her own schedule. The fact that she answered immediately told me something, though I couldn't have said what. Ethan, just my name. The same compression I'd heard in Margaret's voice the day before. Mom, I said. I was with Aunt Margaret yesterday. A silence that lasted exactly long enough to be a confirmation. Is she all right? My mother said. Her voice was careful, perfectly, precisely careful. She told me some things, I said. About the night Daniel died. Another silence. Outside my window, the city was doing what cities do. Traffic, voices, the distant percussion of someone's music. The world entirely indifferent to what was happening in my chest. I think, I said, I need to come home. My mother said very quietly. Yes, just that. Not asterisk what did she tell you. Not I don't know what you mean. Not what are you talking about. Just, yes. And in that single syllable, I heard the weight of 12 years come loose from whatever had been holding it up. I had spent over a decade looking for a stranger in a vehicle. I had never once thought to look in my father's garage. I booked the earliest flight I could find. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and waited for morning to come. The house looked the same. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up in the rental car. How completely, almost offensively unchanged everything was. The same cedar shingles. The same flower beds my mother tended with a consistency that bordered on ritual. The same truck in the driveway, a newer model than the one from 12 years ago, but the same navy blue, as if my father had been incapable of choosing a different color. I sat in the car for a moment. The front curtain moved. Someone had been watching for me. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She looked smaller than I remembered from Christmas, which had only been 11 months ago. But grief and guilt have a way of compressing people, pulling them inward. She was wearing the blue cardigan she'd had for years, the one with the small enamel pin on the lapel that Daniel had given her for her birthday a long time ago. She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there made her own face do something complicated and painful. She stepped back to let me in. My father was in the living room. He was sitting in his chair, the armchair by the window that had been his for as long as I could remember. The one that had shaped itself around him over the decades. And he was not reading, not watching television, not doing anything at all. He was simply sitting there with his hands on his knees, waiting. He looked up when I came in. He looked like a man who had been waiting not just since yesterday, but for a very long time. Ethan, he said. I didn't say anything. I sat down on the couch across from him. and my mother came and stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen. And the three of us existed in a silence that had been 12 years in the making. He told me everything, not in the defensive, lawyerly way I might have expected, not with justifications preloaded, not with a narrative designed to minimize. He told it the way exhausted people tell the truth, which is haltingly, with long pauses, with details that incriminate rather than excuse. Because after long enough, even the story you've been protecting becomes a burden you can no longer carry. He and Daniel had argued that night about money, specifically about a loan my father had made to Daniel 2 years earlier, a substantial one, significant enough that its non-repayment had created a quiet friction between them that neither had fully acknowledged in the presence of others. Daniel had asked for more time. My father had said things he shouldn't have said. Daniel had said things back. He called me something, my father said, and stopped. He looked at his hands. He called me something that I knew, even while I was angry, he didn't entirely mean. But I was. A long pause. I was drinking that evening, not heavily, not falling down drunk, but enough. Enough to make everything feel more final than it was. Daniel had left. My father had followed in the truck, because he said he couldn't let the night end that way. Couldn't let his son walk home in the dark while they were still in the middle of something unresolved. I was trying to get him to stop walking, he said. I had the window down and I was talking to him and he wouldn't turn around. He was furious. And I misjudged. His voice broke briefly, and then he steadied it in the way men of his generation learned to steady things. I misjudged the distance between the truck and the curb. He stepped out at the same moment I pulled too close. It wasn't speed. It wasn't intention. But the physics of it didn't care about intention. He looked up at me. He fell, and I stopped the truck and I got out and he was conscious. He was talking. He said my name. My father's jaw worked for a moment. That's the part I live with, he was talking. The room was very quiet. I panicked, he said, simply, without decoration. I am telling you that I panicked in a way I have no adequate explanation for because there is no adequate explanation. I was frightened and I was not thinking clearly, and instead of calling for help immediately, I moved the truck. I moved it down the road. I was thinking about the drinking. I was thinking about what it would look like. I told myself someone would find him. I told myself it wasn't serious. I told myself. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My mother spoke from the doorway. I knew when he came home, she said. Her voice was different from usual, stripped of its careful management, flat and direct in a way I'd almost never heard from her. He told me that night. Everything. I made him call the hospital. By then they already had Daniel. She moved into the room and sat on the arm of the sofa, not beside me but near me, as if proximity were the only comfort she was able to offer. The doctor told us later, she said, that the injury itself was survivable, that if help had come sooner, she stopped. We didn't know that for certain until weeks later, but once we knew, there was no way to, she looked at her hands. There was no way to separate what he did from what it cost. The collision had not been fatal on its own. The hemorrhage that killed Daniel had developed during the time he lay on the shoulder of the road, untended. 20 minutes, maybe 25. The window in which intervention might have changed the outcome. That was the truth underneath the truth. My father hadn't just failed to report an accident. He had left his son on the ground, conscious and speaking, and driven away. And Daniel had died in the gap. Margaret, my father said, and your Uncle Robert, they were told within the first month. We needed people who knew, who understood why we couldn't, he faltered. I couldn't go to prison, Ethan. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But your mother and I sat in this house, and we looked at what was left, and we made a decision that we have paid for every single day since. You let me search, I said. It was the first thing I'd said since sitting down. He looked at me. You let me spend 12 years, I said. You came to Portland. You put your hand on my shoulder. You said Daniel would know I was a good brother. My voice was very level. I was holding it level the way you hold a full glass, carefully, with complete attention, because if your grip shifts even slightly, it goes everywhere. You sat across from me at dinner tables for 12 years and watched me build a case against a person who didn't exist. My father said nothing. There was nothing to say. Did you ever consider, I said, that what you were actually doing was making sure I never stopped searching? That as long as I was chasing a phantom, I was never going to look at you. He flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but I'd known his face my entire life. "I don't think it was conscious," he said finally. "I want to believe it wasn't conscious, but he stopped. "I don't know. I've asked myself that question for a long time." I left the house that evening without resolving anything. I drove to the cemetery as the light was going. The late afternoon sky doing something spectacular in shades of orange and gray that seemed obscene given the circumstances. Beauty with no regard for timing. I parked and walked to Daniel's grave and stood there in the cooling air with my hands in my coat pockets. The headstone said his name and his dates, and below them the phrase my parents had chosen, which I had always found comforting and now found devastating. Beloved. Remembered. Remembered. I thought about what it meant to remember someone incorrectly, to grieve them through a false story, to spend 12 years channeling love into a search that had been, what? A distraction? A punishment? A way for everyone to participate in the loss without ever having to examine its actual shape. I had believed I was honoring Daniel. I had been, without knowing it, helping everyone else avoid the truth of how he died. There are things I still don't know how to feel. I know my father is not a monster. I know that with the same certainty I know my own name, and I wish sometimes that I didn't, because it would be simpler. Monsters are containable. You can hate a monster without ambivalence, report a monster without grief, walk away from a monster without feeling like you're walking away from something essential to your own history. My father is not a monster. He is a man who made a terrible decision in a moment of panic, and then spent 12 years inside the consequences of it, unable to leave and unable to confess, watching his surviving son dismantle his own life in the service of a lie. I have tried to imagine what that costs a person. I have not yet been able to fully calculate it, but Daniel was conscious when my father left him there. He said my father's name, and my father got back in the truck. That fact does not soften, regardless of how much context I place around it. I can understand a panic. I can understand fear. I cannot find the place where understanding becomes absolution, and I have looked. I did not go to the police. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story ends with justice, with consequences, with the machinery of accountability grinding into motion. That's the version that feels satisfying. That's the version where the 12 years mean something beyond themselves. I didn't go. My father is 71 years old. The statute of limitations on the underlying charge had long since run. There are lawyers I consulted, quietly, who told me that any case would be complicated, would hinge on interpretations of intent and causation that reasonable people could dispute. There were ways to argue it. There were also ways it would go nowhere, would spend years in proceedings, would be another 12 years of a different kind, consuming whatever was left of all of us. Daniel would not be brought back by it. I don't know if that's a reason or a rationalization. I suspect it is both. What I did do was stop searching. That was not a small thing. 12 years of a particular motion, the reaching outward, the constant orientation toward an answer just beyond the horizon, and then the motion simply stops. There's a physical quality to it, like a phantom limb. I see my parents less than I used to. My father and I speak on the phone sometimes. These conversations are short and careful and weighted with everything that is not said, which is most things. He does not ask for forgiveness because I think he understands that it is not mine to give and possibly not available from anywhere. He asks about my work. He asks about the weather in Portland. My mother sent me a letter 3 months after everything, 4 pages, handwritten. She explained her choices in ways I mostly understood and occasionally couldn't accept. She ended it with a line I've read many times. I thought I was protecting what was left. I'm not sure anymore what I was protecting it for. I go back to Daniel's grave when I'm in town. I stand there and I try to talk to him the way I used to, when talking to him felt like talking to a person rather than a question. It's harder now. The grief is more complicated, shot through with angles it didn't used to have. And complicated grief is lonelier than simple grief because you can't explain it to people without explaining everything. What I can tell you is this. For 12 years, I was certain that somewhere out there was a stranger who had taken my brother away from me. A coward hiding behind anonymity, living a life he didn't deserve while Daniel's went unlived. The stranger existed. He just wasn't a stranger. He was the man who taught Daniel to ride a horse at a ranch outside Sacramento, who gave the eulogy at his son's funeral, and wept in a way that everyone who was there described as genuine. Because it was, grief and guilt are not mutually exclusive, which is one of the more disturbing things I've learned. He was my father, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't think I ever will, but I know this much. I'm done searching for things that were never lost. The truth was always here. It was just waiting for someone to stop running long enough to look at it.